Hey guys, Michael Bielecki here. I am at Colorado Moto Service in Denver, Colorado, getting ready to install the new Touratech suspension on my Tenere 700. I've had this bike for about 7,000 miles and it's just been fantastic. But the biggest limitation when you're doing big multi-day excursions is the suspension. So from the factory, the suspension's pretty decent. It's somewhat adjustable. But once you go loading up luggage and gear and camping gear and riding hard off-road like backcountry discovery routes, you really start to see the limitations of that suspension. So upgrading it is one of the best things that you can possibly do for your bike and your body and to just have an overall better experience. So I can't wait to get this installed, so let's go do it.
Alright, the first thing you want to do is take a look at all of your instructions. Make sure you've got the right part, cross-reference everything, and then you're going to start by taking off your side panels. Pretty easy, just 8mm bolts. Next thing you're going to do is start taking off the main bolts for the shock. Just make sure you get the right size socket, double check everything, and then take out each part one by one. This process is really easy. It'll get done in no time. There's basically just two big nuts and bolts to take out to get access to the OEM shock, and then you go ahead and take it out of there, and you can save that as a souvenir if you'd like, or throw it in the trash.
No good.
You can see the difference between the two. If you hold them side by side, take a look at them, it's just a night and day difference. This Touratech shock is a whole new world of awesomeness. The main thing to note is on the Tenere, and you can read ride reports of this, a lot of these bolts seem like they were not lubed enough from the factory, along with the collars and bushings. So a really good idea is to clean those a little bit with a wire brush and make sure you get some good lube on there. And do that for each of the bolts before you start putting the shock in. Make sure you repeat the same process with all the bolts and put them back in the same way that they came out, and make sure you've got the right nuts set aside for each of the corresponding bolts. Next thing you'll do is just get everything all torqued down, those top and bottom main bolts and nuts. It's always a good idea to use a quality torque wrench. The torque settings can be found in the Yamaha factory manual, as well as the Touratech manual does have the torque specs. So double check those, make sure you've got them tightened down properly, and do not over tighten. After that, it's a good idea to go ahead and remove the rest of the bolts for the dog bones, if you will. Same as the others, these have some corrosion on them, so this is a great time to just go ahead and pull those out, clean them up, lube them, put it all back together, and make sure those are all torqued down properly as well. That way you know this is something that you're not going to have to service for some time. Everything will be all nice and lubed and cleaned up, and you'll have trouble-free operation for the next many miles. After you get all those bolts cleaned up and torqued down, you can go ahead and reassemble the panels on the bike, the rear mud flap as well as the side panels. We always recommend use a little bit of grease on the rubber grommets before you put those side panels in. It just keeps the grommets from falling out and getting lost in the engine somewhere. And once you torque those 8mm bolts down, you're pretty much done with the rear shock, and everything is assembled. Just make sure that you double check your work, make sure everything is tightened down properly, and you didn't miss any bolts, any nuts, you don't have any parts left over. After you verify you've got everything done, this is a really good time to go ahead and check your chain tension and lube your chain. You're already in the back there, you already have the bike on a lift, so go ahead and check your factory manual to see what the settings are for your chain slack, and you can make those adjustments, and then again, something that you're not going to have to worry about for a while. And once you get the chain lubed up, you're all set with the rear and ready to move on to the front suspension. So here we go. If you don't have a motorcycle lift, at least get a jack. That way you can lift up the entire front end of the bike, because you will need access to take the forks completely out. First thing you want to do is loosen the top triple clamp bolts and also measure the top of the forks to make sure you know how much it's popping out, because you're going to want to reset this. We always recommend using a rubber glove on the top cap just to make sure you don't mess up the metal on that nut. After that, you can go ahead and remove the brake calipers in the front. It's helpful to get a little bungee cord and hook those to your skid plate or somewhere so that they're not dangling. And you can also remove your front fender. That way everything's out of the way. You've got a clean workspace to be able to remove that wheel and get each of the forks pulled out. So after you get the fender off, go ahead and use your specialty tool there, loosen your pinch bolts, and you can get that front axle out. And go ahead and pull the front wheel out, get it out of the way. You're not going to need it for a little while until you finish up each of the forks. It's a good idea to take a look at what you have for your front springs. Make sure you've got the springs, oil, and your instructions. That'll give you an idea of how much fluid you're going to use. Then go ahead and loosen the rest of the triple clamp bolts and pull one side of the fork legs off. After you go ahead and remove the top cap, go ahead and just disassemble it. All you need to really do is drain the oil, pull out the spring, and remove the rod that's on the inside. We use a little guide tool to help plunge all the fluid through. If you've got one of those, that's helpful. If not, no big deal. Then you just slowly add the fork oil and work it just to get all the bubbles out, get the oil through all the valving. And then get your fork level tool to make sure that you suck out the fluid and set the proper air gap. This is very important. There is some different settings you could do depending on your riding, your weight, and all that. But we recommend you go with the factory settings to at least have a frame of reference on your fluid level. So go ahead and set that air gap properly. After that, you're going to go ahead and put the rod back in. Get the cap on finger tight, and then you'll go ahead and get your rubber glove and your socket to get it all clamped down properly. Not too tight. You want to be really careful that you're not going to strip anything out here. After that, you can get your top cap on basically just tight enough. You're not going to fully torque it down yet because you have nothing to hold on to. Make sure everything moves, works properly, and then you can go ahead and pull the other fork off and repeat the same process for the second fork leg. Now that the forks are done, you can go ahead and put them back into the triple clamp. Remember, you didn't fully tighten the top cap, so what you want to do is tighten the bottom triple clamp bolts. It doesn't matter if you have these perfectly set to where they should be. All you're really doing right now is making sure you've got that top cap torqued down properly. So go ahead and make sure you get that top nice and tight. Now you can loosen the bottom triple clamp bolts again enough to turn and get your level setting. So use your micrometer if you have one. The manual specifies your torque settings as well as how far that top fork should be exposed above the triple clamp. Next thing, you'll just make sure you torque down all of your pinch bolts on the fork tubes. Repeat this process for both sides. Make sure that they're both level and that you've got everything torqued down properly. It's always good to alternate your top and bottom bolts to make sure that you're not putting any extra stress on one part of the clamp on the tube. Next up, you're gonna remove the dust seal from the forks. Touratech supplies some grease, so get these things nice and cleaned, and then you're gonna put a little bit of grease up in the fork tube and around the dust seal. This just helps keep moisture and dust out. Since you just serviced the forks, this is a great time to just do that and make sure you don't have to worry about it again. Then if you have shock socks or something, you can put those back on. I always recommend those. Then you're gonna just reverse the process and get your front fender back on, at least in position to where you can have it set on there, know where everything goes, and then get your front wheel on there. It's always great to clean and lube your front axle, so don't forget to do that, and get everything torqued down. Once you get the front calipers on, that will help you to get a reference of where the front fender goes on, and then you can get each of those little fender bolts back on, and make sure you reconnect your fittings for the brake line as well as the ABS sensor. That's a delicate part. You want to make sure you're careful and that's not hitting anything. And then we always recommend you clean off your rotors with some rubbing alcohol or carb cleaner in case you got any grease on there. And then be sure and torque down your front axle, and most importantly your front hinge bolts. That can be forgotten sometimes, so be careful with that. Then we recommend you just set your settings on the forks. Touratech specifies how many clicks in and out it should be, so look at your manual, get it there. That way you've got a frame of reference and you know where to start.
All right, so we just finished the installation on the bike. I took it out for a little test ride, and man, what a tremendous difference this makes. The bike feels like a whole new machine. It feels more planted, more stable on the twisty pavement, off-road. It just feels like the suspension is one with the bike now. It's moving evenly. The guys at Touratech set everything up, asked for my weight, my riding style before they even shipped the shock out, and it just made such a big difference. If you're looking to upgrade your bike and do a lot of multi-day travels, get off-road, get some good suspension, it's a world of difference. So thanks to the guys at Touratech, and highly recommend it. Take care.